Morning everyone, Tom here from TechNexus, and thanks for joining me on a new week of videos. I haven't spent much time recently inside Plant 3D or even P&ID for that matter, so for this week I wanted to just concentrate on P&IDs. Now, in the early years, I think it was about 2005 or 6 releases, Autodesk came out with AutoCAD P&ID. And around 2009 or the 2010 release, Plant 3D came out, and there were two separate products. You could buy them separately. When the suites came out, Plant, or even from the beginning, Plant 3D always had the P&ID portion, but if you were only doing P&IDs, then you could buy P&ID on its own, and then eventually P&ID sort of went by the wayside, and if you wanted just P&ID, you had to buy Plant 3D itself. And ultimately, once you looked at the pricing and whatnot, it was probably cheaper just to get a Plant Design Suite or eventually an AEC collection just to do some P&IDs, I guess. But ultimately, you could transfer it over into a 3D project anyway. So this is where P&ID sits today. If you want it, you will need to get Plant 3D on its own or the AEC collection, and it doesn't start up as its own product. You start up Plant 3D itself. When you start it up, you don't open files like a normal AutoCAD session. You have to have this project manager loaded, and if you are loading Plant 3D, the project manager will appear up here on the left hand side of the screen, and you can dock it and hide it and do whatever you need to do with it. I like to keep it docked and just sitting on the side here. You have the project name, the P&ID drawing, so you can't change this, you can't rename it, but if I do a new folder under here and call it area 01, then I can come down and rename that folder or even remove it as well. The next folder underneath that, the Plant 3D drawings, is obviously where the 3D drawings live, the pipe specs live here, and the related files live here. So these ones you can't change. So you can see I can click on any of them. I don't get the rename function there as well. So we're going to be working just under the P&ID drawings folder for this week. When you go to create a new project, you give it a name, you give it a description. There's vault options here, which I won't necessarily go into, and where the file is placed, or where the project will be placed. The button down here, copy settings from existing project. So when you do tick that and you tick that box, then you get to pick a folder where the project XML file is. Now, I do this with current clients at the moment. I make a corporate standard, and it will have the P&ID layers already set, the sheets already set, the orthos and their title blocks set, and the isometrics and their title blocks already set. So this is where you would instruct the new users to say copy settings from existing project and look for the XML file for that corporate template. Now, you would try and, I guess, have a CAD administrator do all of this so end users don't accidentally use the corporate template for a project. You might have the corporate template hidden in another directory or a server somewhere, so that way it doesn't get tampered with. If you ever need to make changes to it, you can just open up the corporate template, make changes, and then from that point on, future projects will use that standard and settings. One of the issues, I guess, with Plant 3D is if you update your template project or for an existing project and you want to reuse it on a current one, you can't do it out of the box. There is a third-party tool, which the name escaped me. I think it's called Plant Tools, and they have the ability, they have a little app that can update projects from existing ones, and I'm happy to be corrected in the comments below. I'm not necessarily going to go through and show it, but if you have a quick Google for it, for Plant Tools, or even look on the Autodesk forums, you'll find it there, and they've got some tools to do things with Plant projects that out of the box they don't do. So once you give it a name and a path, then you click on next. And obviously, if you're in the US or anywhere where they use imperial, you have imperial. Otherwise, here in Australia, we use metric, and where the reports, what the units will be in the report. So millimeters or mixed metric. It just really depends. I always leave it in millimeters. Now, this sometimes gets confusing for people when they first do it. This P&ID symbology can't be changed. So out of the box, there's pip, ISO, DIN, and JIS. When you start your own to make a corporate template, you might base it on one of these, but ultimately it will always be called a pip, ISO, DIN, or JIS. So my, I can't put an entry in here called TechNexus. It'll be a TechNexus template based on pip symbology, and we'll go through that a little bit later once I get into the file there as well. The pathing, again, there's nothing really here for the P&IDs because they're always just going to be living in that P&ID folder, and SQL user or multi-user. So for templates, I would probably just leave it as SQLite. You can upgrade from SQLite to SQL Server. There's an executable in the plant installation folder to go from SQLite to SQL Server, but you can't go down from SQL Server to SQLite. So you could always just say, as a base, the SQLite is the database format that we use for our template. And here it says for 1 or 2 members. I'd probably even go to maybe 3 or 4, but anything more than that, I'd be using a SQL Server as well. Now, if you're using Vault, this will automatically be the option for you here as well. There is also the collaborate function to share with BIM 360, but I'm not going to go through that at the moment. And what that does when it downloads and caches it locally, it makes it a SQLite, and then it'll send the changes back up into the server. So for a template, again, I'd probably just leave it at SQLite. If I click on next, it goes through and finishes the wizard, but I don't need to. I'm just going to go through and show you the one that I've already got here. So I haven't made any changes to it. And what we're going to look at today is really just sort of the back end kind of stuff, and then we'll get into a bit more drafting through the week. Now, this option here, you can't, when you go to the project settings, the database setup, you can't change it. It will just tell you which database it is. So if this was a SQL Server, it will give you the name, the prefix, and the authentication type. Okay, so that's really just sort of an info screen. The drawing properties is something that you can add properties to. So when I right click on this and I go to properties, this is where you can add more custom properties in here as well. Now, in some of my dealings, when I did a template in the past, sometimes these don't come in any sort of order. So you kind of have to have a bit of a play and feel and see what happens in here. So I might add entries, entry 1, entry 2, entry 3, and then when I got to about 5 or 6, for whatever reason, it was mixing them all up. So I don't know if that's a bug with the software, but I am fully patched and up to date. But otherwise, we can add a category here and a row of information which becomes our properties. The file naming format, this is always handy for getting some sort of standardization across a project. So the only issue that I can see with this is this applies to every file in the project. So when you do it, so I might say that it's an area and it's a length of 2, and then I will say that it's a discipline and it's a 4, and then I will say, actually I'll call this discipline, and I'll give this number, and it's a 4 as well. So when I apply and OK that, we are going to get a dialog box that asks for those 3 values for every file. So it just means that if I'm doing a new P&ID, so area 1, discipline P&ID 001, Okay, and then if I do the same for a Plant 3D drawing, we get the same thing. So you have to have a think about, is that something you want to have the same throughout the whole project? Otherwise, it might be best just to leave that as a free value, and there is an option down here for people to override and just type in their own values in there as well. So have a think about when you do the file naming convention, is that something you want to keep and apply for every file in the project? The paths, so we have the path for the P&ID, the DWT file, which again you can customize, which is something we might go through the week. The Plant 3D directories, which I'm not going to cover because we're all about P&ID today, the orthos, and where the specs live as well. But for today or for the week, I'm just going to leave it there, but we will go through and set up a new DWT here as well. Project details is just that. So these are entries that we can put in our title block. So project 1, description, number, and more custom categories, which we can put inside our title blocks as well, which is something I'll go through later in the week. Tool palette group association, I usually just leave them as default, and the piping components as well. The reports, this will automatically populate as we progress through the project. So again, I'm not really going to cover too much today. I think we'll go through this sort of thing later in the week. We can go through and modify what we want to see out of that, but let's have a look at that later in the week as well. And the shared plant content, so this is more, I guess, related to the 3D side of things. So when you can have a content folder sitting on the network, and then that way everyone's pointing to the same one. It really depends on the workflow and how you've got it all set up. You can see it does say down here, new content added needs to be synced with other members' shared content folders to support pipe specs. And then using a shared cloud drive can help automate this. So I personally leave it at that. And I would, in a corporate environment, I would set up a batch file to maybe copy the content from a network to your local C drive. So maybe every morning when people log on, or before plant starts, you could have plant start with a batch file and copy files with DOS commands from a network drive to the C drive. There's different trains of thought with that. For me, it's more so about making sure that people can keep using it while I edit content on a network drive. So there are some issues with editing pipe specs in particular on a network drive when people are in the project. So again, it's kind of like the collaborate where people cache it locally off their local drive with the cloud. So again, through a network setting, so we could have the project on the network, but we could have the content on everyone's C drive. So I think that might be something I might cover in the following weeks with how to set all of that up. Okay. So once you go through and set up your general settings, you can go through and set up your P&ID settings. So there's 4 out of the box: flange, socket welded, unspecified, and welded. In all my time, I can never remember ever putting end connections on P&ID symbols. They were a symbol, and the end conditions were more so represented on the 3D side of things. But obviously, if you really wanted to, you can come in here and make your own, but you can see that there are 4 out of the box ones. I would say 100% or 99% of the time I've ever done a P&ID, they've always been gapped, but sometimes people like to do loops. You can put a gap width in there. The gap symbol, the braking, don't use an AutoCAD break, use a P&ID break command to break a line behind equipment, and we'll go through that once I draft off some P&IDs. And you've got some extra values here, standoff distance and the grip settings as well. Export import, I've never touched it in all my years at Autodesk or even now, but you can, I guess, set these up. I'd love to hear from anyone in the comments below if you do the export and import settings and how you utilize it. So again, it's something I'd probably like to have a look at and see how all of that is set up and how people are using it. Data manager configuration, so you can create views in here as well. So I think that's something we might go through later when we do a little bit of P&ID drafting. Now, the class definitions is somewhere where you'll spend a lot of time setting up your look and feel of P&ID. If you drill down to the line segment, so if we go to edit line, you can see it's got a layer. Okay, now if you want to do a new layer, I'll give you a tip here. You have to cancel out of that. You can click OK or cancel, depends on what you've done with the data manager here. And what you have to do is, using a normal AutoCAD open command, go to where your projects are. So project 1, and open up proj symbol style. And then in here, you have to put in the new layers for the configuration standard under the project. So if you don't have it in here, probably create new layers and do whatever you need to do in here first before you start jumping into the project setup. So if I go back, right click on project setup. So if you took note of the layers in proj symbol style, they will be the ones that are represented here under this layer convention here. Okay, so am I showing flow arrows? What's the flow arrow style? The color, whether it's a polyline or a multi-line, line type, scale, and whether it's tagged or not tagged, and the gap priority as well. So the gap priority means whether it's going to break in the horizontal or vertical. And then we click on add to tool palette, which will add it to the palette that currently exists. So if you accidentally have non-engineering and you click add to tool palette, it'll put a primary segment line on the non-engineering palette. So you just have to make sure you're on the right palette here. You can go through and add new properties down here. Okay, you can add them at the higher level, at the parent level. So if I add them here at the parent level, then they'll appear in each of the children. If I add it at the child here at the primary line segment, then it's not going to appear for the secondary line segment. Out of the box, there are 4 entries in the pipeline tag. If I click on modify, then we can go through and add some more, and I can add entries such as, the first one is a class property from the pipeline segments. So again, this might be where you add your own custom entries in here. You've got drawing properties, so you can be tricky with putting maybe the author's name in the pipeline tag. You can add project properties, so you can put the project number in your pipeline tag, or you've got the options here to define the expression here, so whether it's all uppercase, whether it's a fixed length, and whether it's a freestyle, and even auto generate. So the auto generate is handy for, if we look at the hand valves, let's go to check valves and go to modify, and then click on the defined expression for the number, and you'll see there's a project field called last valve number, and then it'll add onto that. It'll grab the last one. So for some people, you might have a look at using this. So make a new field, one for gate valves, one for ball valves maybe, but you will need to sort of have a look at these if you want to auto generate some of the expressions. The tags themselves, so you've got different labels as well, so we can edit the annotation, which is layers, colors, scales, anything else. If you want to edit them at a high level, you need to go up to the parent and click on edit block, and then that takes you to where the tag format is. And then from in here, you can go through and assign the format. So, and again, just grabbing information and data out of the project as well. So just closing out of the block editor brings us back to here. There's also other settings for pipeline group, for the signal line group. In recent years, Autodesk gave the ability to add OPC, so off-page connectors, to the signal lines. So if you do need to, Otherwise, again, in my time before AutoCAD P&ID, I don't recall too many OPCs of signal lines, but again, because you can do it now, more and more people might be doing it as well. You've got nozzle styles, so double line, flange nozzle, front, and single line nozzles. Like everything else, just go through and you can modify those settings in here as well. P&ID painter settings. So under here, you might draw your pipelines to be a particular color or symbol or whatever else, but here with the P&ID painter, we can color everything by a service or color everything by a size. And I think, again, we might go through all of these settings once we set up some P&IDs, and then we can have a look at how the painter works. It is assigning color by, so we've got service status, installation type, size, spec, line service code. There was a really good question on the forums about changing the line type, and I don't think that was in there, or it gives the ability to do it. So again, might be something you want to give to Autodesk in the idea station. And pipe specs in P&ID. Now, I personally don't like this because usually in my experience, P&IDs are always changing, so the pipe specs aren't always locked down. You can have it as spec driven, but I'm still yet to find a project where the specs are locked before even a P&ID is done. So I usually like to leave it as standard and keep it as a standard in a template anyway, and then this is just essentially a text field instead of a pull down field. So again, that's my own personal opinion. I don't, you will sort out whether your project has the ability to use pipe specs in a P&ID, but every time I mention it, people laugh and agree that pipe specs are never finished with a P&ID, well, when they start a P&ID anyway. So people usually just leave it. I'll just close off this 3D file and go back to my P&ID. Okay, so before you even set up or start modeling a P&ID, you will have to go through and do the project setup under here, and only then, once your tool palettes are all set up, then you can probably give it out to users. So timing wise, I usually like to allocate about a week to do P&ID configurations, and that's giving time to go back and forth to the client as well, and waiting for them to do markups and waiting for emails and making sure that they have all the symbology. So if you are doing a P&ID project or even a plant project and you need to do the P&IDs first off, allow yourself around a week before you can even start doing it. If you're in a big enough company where you can afford to have someone doing it in the background on an overhead job number or something, then give them time to set it up. You might spend a week or two doing a corporate template and make sure that everything is finished. So then you can send it out to the users and get them to base projects based on your corporate template. So I think that's going to cover today's video. Hopefully it's been informative for you. If you've got any questions, please put them in the comments section below. I'm more than happy to answer them through the comments, or otherwise I can make a video explaining the answer. Thumbs up if you liked the video, thumbs down if you didn't, but please do subscribe to the channel. Click on the bell icon to get daily notifications of all of my videos. And I will see you tomorrow, where we have a little bit more of a look at things like the title blocks, and then eventually through the week we will start drafting up some P&IDs, and then hopefully by the end of the week we can start having a look at reports and what else we can do with our P&IDs. So again, thanks for watching, and I will see you tomorrow for some more AutoCAD P&IDs. See you later.